What was supposed to be a routine morning interview quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television history. A simple album promotion, a polished music icon, and a friendly host, everything seemed set for an easygoing segment. But when unexpected questions were introduced, questions that were never agreed upon, and when the host refused to back down despite repeated signals to change direction, the situation unraveled fast. This is the story of how Gwen Stefani walked off The Today Show and how a calm conversation turned into something nobody saw coming. The studio lights were as bright as ever, and the atmosphere felt typical for a Tuesday morning broadcast. Gwen Stefani sat across from host Sarah Mitchell, exuding the practiced confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating interviews. The opening moments were warm and familiar. Sarah asked about Gwen's upcoming album, her creative process, and what fans could expect from the tour. Gwen responded enthusiastically, smiling as she shared stories about late-night recording sessions and collaborations that shaped the sound of the project. Everything felt easy, even comfortable. Then Sarah shifted in her seat, and the energy in the room subtly changed. She leaned forward, her tone sharpening as her expression turned more serious. What came next was not on the agenda. Sarah casually introduced a topic that had been circulating online, referencing comments made by Gwen's former bandmates about creative control in No Doubt's early years. She suggested that some believed Gwen had rewritten history in recent interviews and directly asked for her response. For a brief moment, Gwen's smile faltered. Off camera, her publicist stiffened. This topic had been explicitly ruled out during pre-interview negotiations. The agreement was clear. This segment was about new music, touring, and light personal reflection, not decades-old band drama. Still, Gwen answered calmly, explaining that the people who were actually there understood the dynamic. She expressed gratitude for her time in the band, acknowledged their shared youth, and insisted there was no history needing revision. But Sarah didn't move on. Instead, she doubled down. She quoted a recent podcast naming Tony directly, and repeated claims that Gwen's role in songwriting had been overstated, suggesting some contributions were more performative than creative. She asked whether Gwen believed there had been misunderstandings or selective memory. The smile was gone entirely now. Gwen took a slow breath, clearly caught off guard by the persistence and tone. She carefully reaffirmed her involvement, emphasizing that she was present for every decision, every song, every long night. Then she drew a firm boundary, stating plainly that this was not the time or place to rehash old disputes, especially when she was there to celebrate new music. Any seasoned interviewer would have recognized that as a clear cue to pivot. Sarah did not. Instead, she pushed harder, framing the issue as one of authenticity and credit. She implied that multiple similar accounts raised legitimate questions and then asked something that shifted the room entirely, whether ego might be influencing Gwen's recollection of those years. The word ego landed heavily. Gwen's publicist stood up, signaling for the conversation to stop. But the broadcast was live, and Sarah still held the microphone. Gwen responded with restraint, but her frustration was unmistakable. She stated firmly that she had always been honest about her life and career. Then she paused, looked directly at Sarah, and made it clear she was uncomfortable with the direction of the interview. In that moment, the silence said more than words. Gwen removed her microphone, thanked the audience briefly, and stood up from her chair. Cameras scrambled. Producers rushed. And just like that, Gwen Stefani walked off The Today Show, leaving viewers stunned and an interview unfinished, proof that even seasoned professionals have limits. And when those limits are crossed, the fallout can be instant and unforgettable. Gwen's composure finally cracked not into anger, but into clarity. She explained that she had already spoken openly, time and again, about collaboration, personal growth, and the mistakes she'd made throughout her career. What was happening now, she said, felt less like journalism and more like a deliberate attempt to manufacture conflict where none belonged. She had come onto the show in good faith to discuss her new work, only to be blindsided by talking points pulled from interviews she hadn't even heard. Sarah pushed back defensively, insisting she was simply asking what the audience wanted to know. This was live television. She argued real conversations, not puff pieces. As a public figure, Gwen should expect uncomfortable questions. Gwen immediately drew a distinction. There was, she said, a clear difference between discomfort and disrespect, between tough questioning and a calculated ambush. None of this had been disclosed beforehand. Producers had assured her team that the focus would be the album. If the intent had been a confrontational interview, she deserved honesty from the start. The tension in the studio became suffocating. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances as Sarah refused to retreat, defending her approach by saying that comments from former collaborators weren't secrets. They were public, she said, and viewers had a right to hear Gwen's response. Wasn't that fair? Gwen adjusted the microphone clipped to her jacket, visibly weighing whether to remove it altogether. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but razor-sharp. Fairness, she said, meant honoring agreements made before a guest ever sat in that chair. Fairness meant basic respect. Just because something was public didn't make it appropriate to weaponize it, especially in what was supposed to be a celebration of new art. Then she named the truth plainly. Sarah was using the words of former friends to try to humiliate her on national television. Sarah bristled, claiming she only wanted an honest conversation. Gwen's response was immediate honesty, didn't come wrapped in ambush. She accused the show of booking her under false pretenses, of positioning her for a viral moment at her expense. That wasn't journalism. She said it was something else entirely. Sarah shifted again, adopting a tone of measured concern and suggesting Gwen was becoming defensive. Maybe, she implied, that defensiveness revealed something deeper. The word emotional slipped in casually, and it changed everything. Gwen's expression hardened. Anyone watching could see she was done redirecting. Done being polite, emotional. Gwen repeated, ice in her voice. She called out the familiar tactic, how a woman standing up for herself is instantly labeled emotional. She wasn't emotional, she said. She was clear. Clear that the interview had been misrepresented. Clear that Sarah was chasing drama, not dialogue. Clear that her answers didn't matter, only the sound bites did. Sarah denied it, but even as she scrambled through her notes, her body language betrayed her. Then she launched into another question, asking whether Gwen regretted how she went solo. Whether she had handled leaving the band differently. Gwen laughed in disbelief. Asking if she regretted a solo career, regretted pursuing her own artistic vision, was absurd. Sarah tried to reframe the question, but the damage was done. She pointed to a supposed pattern, claiming multiple collaborators had felt sidelined. At some point, Sarah said, didn't Gwen need to examine herself? That accusation stunned Gwen into a moment of silence. She stared at Sarah as if trying to comprehend a reality where a morning show host felt entitled to psychoanalyze her based on gossip and edited clips. When Gwen finally spoke. Her voice was dangerously calm. Sarah didn't know her, she said. She didn't know her relationships, her private conversations, or the complexity of making career decisions while preserving friendships. Reducing decades of lived experience to tabloid narratives and podcast soundbites was reckless. Sarah countered that the comments came from people who knew Gwen personally, and that consistency mattered. Gwen replied that she wasn't dismissing anyone, but she also wasn't going to defend herself against vague accusations and second-hand character attacks. Then, Gwen widened the lens. If they wanted to talk about patterns, she said. Let's talk about the real ones, the pattern of women in the music industry being held to impossible standards. Of female artists being interrogated about their personalities rather than their work. Of interviews turning into judgments about likability. Humility and cooperation in ways men rarely face. Sarah pushed back, insisting this was about accountability, not gender. Gwen shot back without hesitation, it was about both. And if Sarah couldn't see how gender shaped this conversation, then she was either naive or willfully ignorant. Asterisk. Gwen asked the question that lingered in the air for everyone watching. Would these words emotional, defensive, ego be used if she were a man? Sarah claimed she would ask anyone the same questions, but the conviction was gone. What remained was a studio thick with tension. A line that had undeniably been crossed, and a confrontation that had moved far beyond music and was now hurtling toward an ending no one could spin. Legitimate? Gwen shot back, disbelief sharpening her words. Legitimate, according to whom? According to Sarah. Or according to producers who saw a ratings opportunity and turned what should have been a straightforward promotional interview into a public trial. She reminded Sarah that she had spent 3 decades in the industry and endured thousands of interviews. She knew the difference between being challenged and being interrogated. And what was happening now was not tough journalism, it was hostile. Asterisk, by this point. The discomfort in the studio was impossible to ignore. Crew members avoided eye contact, silently debating whether someone should step in. The segment producer was glued to her phone, undoubtedly receiving urgent instructions from higher-ups as the situation unraveled on live television. Still, Sarah pressed forward, her tone tinged with wounded indignation. She insisted Gwen was being unfair, that she was simply doing her job by asking questions the public wanted answered. Then she crossed a line, suggesting that if Gwen wasn't willing to engage, maybe she wasn't ready to do interviews at all. Asterisk, that remark landed hard. Gwen's frustration shifted into disbelief. She pointed out that she had been doing interviews since before Sarah had likely even entered journalism school. She had faced difficult questions, scrutiny, and criticism with professionalism and grace. But what Sarah was doing now, Gwen said, wasn't journalism, it was entertainment at someone else's expense, and she refused to participate any longer. Asterisk, Sarah, now clearly losing control of the moment, accused Gwen of shutting down instead of having a real conversation. Desperation crept into her voice as she tried to wrestle the narrative back. Gwen's response, however, was come almost unsettlingly so. She explained that she wasn't shutting down. She was setting a boundary. She didn't have to sit there and be disrespected simply because someone else had a microphone. Real conversations, she said, required mutual respect, good faith, and the willingness to listen. None of those were present anymore. Asterisk, Sarah made one last attempt, urging Gwen to take a breath and reconsider. She framed the ambush as an opportunity to set the record straight. Gwen didn't answer with words. Instead, she stood. The movement was unhurried and deliberate. She reached up, calmly removed her microphone, and placed it neatly on the chair she had just vacated. When she looked back at Sarah, her expression was resolute. What she wanted, Gwen said, was simple basic human decency. And since that was apparently too much to ask, she was done. Asterisk, Sarah's face cycled through shock, panic, and defensive anger. She reminded Gwen they were live and that 4 minutes still remained in the segment. Gwen replied with a single liberated word. Watch me. She told Sarah to fill the remaining time however she liked, perhaps by explaining to viewers how the interview had gone so wrong, or by justifying why ambushing guests had become acceptable television. Asterisk, Sarah snapped back, calling the walk-off unprofessional and accusing Gwen of breaking her commitment to the show. Gwen stopped, turned fully back toward her, and spoke with a cold, controlled authority. If Sarah wanted to discuss professionalism, Gwen said, They could start with lying to a guest's team, blindsiding someone with hostile questioning, and using personal relationships for ratings. The professional agreement had been broken the moment Sarah chose attack over conversation. Sarah weakly denied lying, insisting the topics fell within standard interview bounds and that public figures were subject to scrutiny. Gwen stepped closer not in anger, but in finality. Being a celebrity, she said, didn't mean surrendering basic respect. It didn't mean tolerating invasiveness or quiet humiliation for the sake of entertainment. Sarah had confused access with entitlement, and that was her mistake. The studio fell completely silent. Cameras continued to roll as millions watched the implosion in real time. Sarah tried one last time, her voice nearly pleading, asking for a reset. But it was already over. Gwen Stefani had made her boundary unmistakably clear, and with the entire nation watching. She walked off the set, leaving behind an interview that would be remembered not for music, but for exactly how far it went too far. Sarah made one last attempt to recover. She suggested they start fresh, return to the album, and move past what had just happened. Gwen's response was instant, her sarcasm unmistakable. That was generous, she said, but she had no interest in moving past this. She was interested in moving on from it. Moving past it would require pretending nothing had happened. Pretending Sarah hadn't revealed exactly who she was and how far she was willing to go for a story. Moving on meant walking out, not coming back, and making sure people knew why. Fear crept into Sarah's voice as she asked if Gwen planned to trash the show. Gwen corrected her calmly. She planned to tell the truth about being misled, ambushed, and disrespected. If that truth made the show look bad, then perhaps the show should have considered that before choosing to treat a guest this way. Sarah had made her choices. Now she would live with them. Sarah's face flushed, the line between embarrassment and anger blurring. She snapped back, accusing Gwen of running away from hard questions and proving that accusations of defensiveness and ego were justified. Gwen smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that comes when suspicions are confirmed. There it was, she said, the real Sarah. Not a concerned journalist seeking honest conversation, but someone who lashed out when she lost control. Thank you for making it so clear. Sarah finally dropped any remaining pretense of professionalism. She told Gwen to get out, warned her that no one would care, and insisted this would follow her for the rest of her career. Gwen didn't respond. She didn't need to. The contrast between her calm composure and Sarah's unraveling spoke louder than words ever could. Gwen turned and walked toward the edge of the set, her posture steady, her steps deliberate. From off camera, a voice shouted that they were going to commercial, the decision coming far too late. But before the feed cut, Gwen stopped one last time and looked directly into the camera. She spoke clearly, her voice strong and unshaken. Viewers deserved better than this kind of television. She said, better than manufactured drama and ambushes dressed up as interviews. They deserved insight, respect, and honesty. This wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. And she hoped people would remember that the next time the show asked for their time. Then Gwen Stefani walked off, disappearing into the studio wings and leaving Sarah standing alone as the camera finally cut away. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic sounds of producers scrambling behind the scenes. Sarah stood frozen, beginning to realize the magnitude of what had just happened. What she thought would be a bold, confrontational moment had instead exposed her tactics and backfired spectacularly. In the control room. Phones rang non-stop. Social media erupted as clips spread at lightning speed, some praising Gwen's resolve, others condemning the show's tactics. Network executives likely convened emergency meetings to contain the damage. Meanwhile, Gwen was already gone, heading away from the studio with a mix of frustration, vindication, and relief, knowing she had finally said what needed to be said. Asterisk. The remaining minutes of the segment were filled with an awkward commercial break and a vague on-air explanation about technical difficulties. But viewers knew the truth. There were no technical issues, only a complete breakdown of trust between interviewer and guest. And that was how Gwen Stefani walked off the Today Show. Not in a tantrum, not in chaos, but with dignity, clarity, and an unwillingness to be treated as anything less than the accomplished artist and human being that she is. Asterisk. Whether you believe she was right to leave or should have stayed, one thing is undeniable. She made her point in a way no one watching will soon forget. Now the question is yours: was Gwen justified in walking away, or could this have ended differently? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe, because moments like this don't happen often, and when they do, they change the conversation.